USA is the home of serial killers. A killer is defined as serial when they have killed 3 or more people in various attacks. Of the prolific serial killers known around the world, 74% were born and raised in the USA.
Welcome back, everybody, to Murder with Mo, the true crime podcast that covers serial killer cases in the US of A. I'm your host, Mo, and I'm on the case today. Trigger warning, everybody. Today's episode talks about sexual assault, harm to minors, and cannibalism. Please make sure that you listen with care for today's episode. Now, who watching is a foodie? I mean, I know I definitely am. Me and my friends, we love a good food spot that has a bomb aesthetic, the environment is cool, and the food is just spectacular. Now, everybody does have a different preference, usually for what they want to eat. Some don't like meat, others prefer just seafood or poultry, or maybe just want veggies. Others could also live a gluten-free lifestyle and a vegan lifestyle. Now, with all the dietary restrictions out there and likes of dislikes of food, one thing I'm sure that we all can agree on, the general population can agree on, is that we will refuse to eat human flesh. A human body is something I'm pretty sure is an absolute hell no. But for today's serial killer, human bodies were the first thing on the list of food items to eat for the night and every other day. This infamous killer would dismember the bodies of young men, mostly young men of color, in his house and would store their body parts in his fridge. And while some of their body parts were stored in the fridge, he would be preparing a 5-star meal with the other parts to eat for dinner. Now, I'm sure you guys are thinking so many different thoughts regarding this. I mean, how could you not? What first clicked in my head was the smell. I mean, decaying human flesh has a distinct, rancid, stomach-turning stench to it. And this was a smell that would actually penetrate the walls of the tenants in the other apartments that were either adjacent to him or next to him. Absolutely disgusting. This man eluded police for 13 years and any kind of suspicion from neighbors, loved ones, and anybody else that he knew. You've guessed it. We're covering Jeffrey Dahmer today, y'all. Strap on y'all seatbelts and get ready. Jeffrey Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Lionel Herbert Dahmer and Joyce Annette Dahmer. Those that watched Dahmer grow up described him as an energetic and loving child for the first 4 years of his life. Now, that was until he was diagnosed with a double hernia in his scrotum, and he did require a very big extensive surgery in order to remove it. Now, after the surgery, there was a noticeable change in Dahmer. I mean, he was more withdrawn and emotionally unavailable. Now, regardless of there being anything found or if there's any research done about it, Dahmer's parents noted that he was a noticeably different child after having this surgery done. When Dahmer reached young adolescence, his family moved to Ohio, and that is where he planted his roots and stayed into his adult years. While in Ohio, Dahmer developed a fascination with animal bones and studied how to be properly clean and preserve them. Now, as a child, he also collected large insects in the skulls of small animals and preserved them in jars of formaldehyde. Now, I'm all for kids having their strange fixes and interests, letting them do what they want to do. But personally, if my child comes home putting animal skulls in formaldehyde, oh baby, we're going to see the lady, because excuse me, what is going on here? Dahmer's early adolescence was pretty tumultuous. I mean, his parents were having a very chaotic divorce from one another, one that I believe they should have done a better job of really keeping the kids shielded from. I mean, kids don't deserve to be in the middle of a custody battle, a divorce, anything. His parents had numerous arguments, and the constant tension in the household actually made Dahmer question the solidity of his life and his family. At the age of 13, Dahmer was completely disengaged. He was tense and largely friendless. I mean, he was pretty much what you would describe as a loner. Yeah, he pretty much became a loner. By the age of 14, Dahmer began heavily drinking alcohol, and at this time, he started having these morbid compulsions growing in his mind. Fantasize about necrophilia and murder through these compulsions. Now, throughout high school, one of Dahmer's wild and odd fantasies that he had strong urges to act on were about picking up a hitchhiker and taking them back to the house and having complete dominance and control over them. Now, shortly after graduating from high school in June of 1978, Dahmer was going to be able to act on his most devious urges. One day, while he was coming back from the shopping mall, he spotted 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks. He decided to pick Hicks up and give him a ride, take him to his house. Dahmer proceeded to get the young man drunk, and when Hicks tried to actually leave to go to where he really needed to be at that he was trying to hitchhike to, Dahmer went into complete hysterics because Again, he didn't want him to leave. He wanted him to stay. He didn't want to feel alone. He said to Steven, I don't want you to leave me. And when Steven still attempted to leave the house after being weirded out by Dahmer, Dahmer straight up killed this man. He struck him in the head and strangled him with a barbell. A barbell. Now, Dahmer dismembered Hicks' corpse, packed the body parts in plastic bags, and buried them behind his parents' home. He later exhumed the remains, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them across a wooded ravine. So after having his murderous adventures, Dahmer wanted to follow in what his dad wants and needs of him to do. So he went to register to take classes at the Ohio State University, but soon dropped out of the university a little less than 1 quarter in due to his issues with alcohol abuse and poor academic performance. Y'all, his GPA was a whopping 0.45. Do you know how incredibly bad you'd have to be doing in your classes to get a 0.45? You don't even have a 1. Like, you could show up and get a 1.0. Like, that man was failing classes with flying colors. Had fat daddy Fs, if you will, across the board. My goodness. So Dahmer's failure to complete his university degree was a major letdown for his father, and it was really hard for him to accept it. So he insisted on Dahmer enlisting himself in the army and trying to constantly please what his dad wanted. Dahmer, of course, did exactly that. So in late December 1978, he was posted to Germany shortly thereafter. Because his drinking had spiraled completely out of control, persisting, and even during his stint in the army, persistently drinking, in early 1981, the army discharged him. So following his discharge, Dahmer returned home to Ohio. And then, shortly after returning home a year later, he was arrested for disorderly conduct. And that prompted his father to send Dahmer to actually live with his grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in Wisconsin. His alcohol problem continued, and he was arrested the following summer for another indecent exposure. He was arrested once again in 1986 when two 12-year-old boys accused him of masturbating in front of them. He received a 1-year probationary sentence, and in my opinion, he should have been brought in for a way longer punishment because of the lewd acts with a minor, especially since shortly after this incident in September of 1987, he took his second murder victim, Stephen Tuomi, out of this world. Stephen Tuomi met Jeffrey Dahmer, and the two of them went to check into a hotel room and drank the entire night. The details of the night are very fuzzy, as Dahmer claims that he wasn't in his right state of mind due to the alcohol consumption and drugs that he was taking. So the following morning, Dahmer eventually woke up to find Tuomi dead and claims that he was confused because he had no memory of the previous night's activities. He intended on drugging Tuomi, but not to actually kill him, which is just like, I mean, both are horrible. Anyways, he could not believe this had happened. So instead of doing what I believe someone who was without guilt would do if they woke up next to a dead body, which is call the police, Dahmer went out and bought a large suitcase to transport his body to his grandmother's basement. Now, once there, he dismembered his body and proceeded to masturbate on the corpse before disposing of his remains. He kept the head, though, of this victim, which was wrapped in a blanket. Now, for weeks after the murder, he kept this head. He kept it near him. He kept it around him. He loved having this head around, you guys. Now, this is when Dahmer's obsession with murder came into full effect, and he didn't have any interest in trying to control or stop himself from acting on these urges. In October 1987, only a month after the death of Stephen, Dahmer lured another victim to his grandmother's basement. He brought 14-year-old James Dockstader to the basement of his grandmother's house after promising him $50 in exchange for him posing for nude pictures. So after drugging him, because that's the only way that Dahmer could subdue them, he strangled Dockstader, disposing of his body in a similar fashion to that of Stevens. And 5 months following the murder of James, March 1988, Dahmer meets his next victim outside of a gay bar. It was Richard Guerrero, who was enjoying the Milwaukee nightlife. He was having a great night partying at the gay bar when he caught the eye of Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, after approaching Guerrero and making conversation with him, Dahmer offered him $50 to return to his grandmother's house and spend the night with him. After drugging him with sleeping pills, Dahmer strangled him before performing sexual acts on the corpse. This time, Dahmer dismembered the body within 24 hours, but hiding his killings and the dismemberments were really becoming increasingly difficult as his grandmother was becoming very suspicious of the random young men that he was bringing back to the house. Who wouldn't peep that? And the men were a lot younger than what Dahmer actually was anyway. So her suspicions reached a new level on April 2nd, 1988. In the early morning hours, Dahmer brought another young man home by the name of Ronald Flowers back to her house. Upon entering the home, Dahmer offered Ronald a refreshment that was spiked with sedatives that immediately took effect on him, and he went unconscious. Once the drugs worked, Dahmer was preparing to take him to the basement to have his way with him. That is, though, until his grandmother heard the commotion of them coming into the house from downstairs and intervened into whatever plans Dahmer had for this young man. His grandmother said something was completely wrong and demanded for this young man to be taken to the hospital safely, or she would be staying with them until he woke up and she knew he was okay. From what Ronald Flower accounts, he woke up in County General Hospital in Milwaukee with bruises all over his body. He was also missing money and his bracelet. Now, at this point, Dahmer's grandmother was actually fed up. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for her. She forced him to move out in 1988, and she claims, you guys, that she had no knowledge of his crimes and what he was actually doing. She was just tired of his drinking and his tendency to bring young men over to her house, and the foul smells that occasionally came from her basement being the reason why she decided to kick him out for good. Now, within a few days of Dahmer moving into his new apartment, he decided to have his own version of what most normal people would consider a housewarming. But his version was luring a 13-year-old Keeson back to his apartment where he drugged and molested the boy. Now, thankfully for Keeson, he escaped before Dahmer was able to finish the job that he intended. Now, after escaping, he took his story to the police to have Dahmer held accountable for what he did. Dahmer spent only a week in jail before being released on bail. Now, while on bail and awaiting sentencing for his already current sexual assault case, Dahmer really just couldn't help himself. So in March of 1989, he lured, drugged, strangled, sodomized, photographed, dismembered, and disposed of the body of Anthony Sears, who was an aspiring model at the time. Dahmer found Sears particularly attractive and later said that he did not want to lose him. So this creep Dahmer kept preserved body parts, mummifying his head and genitals, keeping it in his fridge. As if being out on bail for sexual assault wasn't enough. Sick, like you can't control yourself for just, my goodness. In May of 1989, his sentencing trial took place, and this man was putting on a show for the courtroom, y'all. He spoke out during trial, defending himself, arguing eloquently in his own words about how he had seen the error of his ways, and that his arrest marked a complete turning point in his life, and he will change, yada, yada, yada. He was going to take the court to church, y'all, trying to defend himself. His defense team stepped in to aid in saying that Dahmer needed actual psychiatric help instead of jail time. Now, thankfully, the judge did not rule in this favor and sentenced Dahmer to 1 year in jail, but he did allow for him to be released during the day to attend his shift at work. I didn't know jail worked like that. Anyways, 10 months went by and Dahmer got released early due to good behavior. Just months after being released from jail, Dahmer killed Raymond Smith, a 32-year-old prostitute that he had offered $50 to for sex. After drugging Smith at his North 25th Street apartment, Dahmer strangled him with his hands before taking Polaroid pictures of the corpse in suggestive poses. Dismembering the body in his bathroom, Dahmer boiled the remains, dissolving them in a container of acid except for Smith's skull, which he kept in a cabinet alongside Sears' skull. He was having a skull collection. Like, you know, people have like a spice cabinet. He had a skull cabinet. That's crazy. When neighbors complained of the smell emanating from his apartment, Dahmer told them that, you know, his refrigerator was just broken and he had a lot of meat that was going bad and he had to wait to get it fixed and get the meat removed. Who would believe that? At this point, Dahmer was going full throttle in his murders. Like, he was going back to back and really wasn't taking any breaks. I mean, a month after the murder of Raymond Smith, he murdered Edward Smith and actually attempted again to preserve his entire body. So he went from only preserving parts of the body to preserving the whole entire body, but with little or no knowledge on how to properly do that, the bodies ended up decaying. So September 1990, Dahmer claims 2 more victims, but deviates from his previous methods with these 2. When 22-year-old Ernest Miller was lured into Dahmer's apartment after being promised money to engage in certain acts with him, Dahmer realizes he was out of the sedatives that he usually uses. So he had to resort to other tactics of subduing Miller, and this led to him slashing his throat from behind. Back to his regular programming, he dismembered Miller's body and actually kept parts to eat. Something he was, starting to become more frequent in doing in every single murder. This became basically his MO. Now, after dismembering his body, he painted and displayed Miller's head in his apartment. He made a sculpture out of this man's head. 3 weeks later, Dahmer killed 22-year-old David Thomas, but something was different with Thomas. Dahmer wasn't necessarily attracted to Thomas, he claims, and had the feeling of not wanting Thomas to leave him like he did with the others. So with that being said, I mean, that didn't stop him, though, from killing him and drugging him and doing all this stuff. But instead of keeping his body parts, he actually disposed of the whole body, being intentional to not keep anything from him. Now, the body count just kept rising for Dahmer. From February 1991 to July 1991, he would murder 7 more young boys, repeating the dismembering of their bodies, storing the body parts in his refrigerator, and cooking them as his meals. Now, the killing and cannibalism was really getting out of control to the point that the neighbors, again, were starting to take notice. They would complain, again, about the smell that would be piercing their walls and their vents from Dahmer's. And when asked again about the rancid smell that was causing them, he was explaining to them that, well, his fridge just broke again and he had to get it fixed. Now, mind you guys, during all of this, the police had been called so many times on Dahmer. So many times they had made trips to his house. They were called by the neighbors. Complaints filed by very few of the other victims that survived Dahmer's advances. Even when one of those victims were outside naked and nothing but a bedsheet wrapped around him and clearly drugged, the police still did nothing. They sent that poor young man back upstairs with Dahmer and believed Dahmer when he claimed that they were lovers that just got into a squabble. Like, what? Neighbors explained the weird things Dahmer was doing in his apartment, and like I said, it was just so much that the police should have done in a better way of protecting these young men. But again, in theory, and things that are said, it was pretty much because they were, 1, men of color, and 2, because they may have been gay, that the police took no interest. But the police should have done a better job, hands down, of protecting these young men from Dahmer. Finally, on July 22nd, 1991, while out on patrol, 2 Milwaukee police officers were flagged down by a deeply disturbed man. He was really shaken up, they saw, and he had a handcuff attached to his wrist and was running full speed toward them. This man was named Tracy Edwards, who was 32 years old. He told the officers that a freak had placed the handcuffs on him and he had spent the better part of the evening trying to escape from a nearby apartment where this freak was holding him captive. So I'm going to give you guys a little backstory on how Edwards even ended up in Dahmer's apartment that night. Earlier in the evening, the 2 met and Dahmer invited Edwards back to his apartment, and as soon as they entered the apartment, Edwards immediately noticed a foul smell and the stacked boxes of hydrochloric acid that were set up in the house. So Dahmer had tried to place handcuffs at this point on Edwards, and he succeeded, but only succeeded in fastening one of them on his wrist. So at this point, Dahmer brandished a knife toward Edwards and told Edwards to follow him into the room so Dahmer could take naked pictures of him. So Edward realized he needed to go into survival mode so that he could survive. He continually told Dahmer that he was his friend and that he loved him and he wanted to be with him, things that Dahmer wanted to hear. He waited until Dahmer had a lapse of concentration to then punch Dahmer directly in the face. In the confusion, Edwards fled through the front door, eventually flagging down the police car. So now that we're all up to speed, that night when Edwards finished telling the police the story, they decided, okay, let's go check it out, and they go to Dahmer's apartment. Now, upon their arrival at his apartment, Dahmer invited the attending officers in, admitting that it was he who had placed the handcuffs on Edward and that the keys were in his nightstand and he'll go get them to undo the cuffs. On entering the bedroom, one police officer noticed a partially open drawer filled with Polaroid pictures of numerous bodies in differing states of dismemberment. Brandishing the images, the officer returned to the living room, reportedly saying to his partner, "These are real." Duh. Seeing the images, Dahmer attempted to escape quickly once he knew that the jig was up, but was quickly subdued by police, who immediately called for assistance. Now, when authorities and the assistants and everybody got there, and they opened his refrigerator and they looked at what they were going to see, nothing could have prepared them for this, you guys. When authorities opened Dahmer's refrigerator door, they found the severed head of a black male on the bottom shelf. The authorities they just would not be able to guess what else that they would find in that man's house, y'all. So upon continuing to investigate the house, subsequent searches revealed a head in the refrigerator, 3 more in the freezer, and a catalog of other horrors, including preserved skull jars, jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of macrobee Polaroid photographs of the victims and their dismemberment. So Dahmer later said that he had planned to build a private altar for his victims' skulls. Like, what is wrong with you? He wanted to adorn them with incense and sticks and globe lights and really give them the proper love that they deserve. He wanted it to be a place where he could feel like he was at home. So now trial is about to start, and because Dahmer's victims were mostly people of color, there were considerable racial tensions. So strict security precautions were taken during this trial, including an 8-foot barrier of bulletproof glass that separated him from the gallery. The inclusion of only one black person on the jury provoked further unrest, but was ultimately contained and short-lived. Lionel Dahmer and his second wife attended the trial throughout. Dahmer initially pleaded not guilty to all of the charges, despite having confessed to the killings during police interrogation. He eventually changed his mind, of course, and pleaded guilty by virtue of insanity. His defense even offered the gruesome details of his behavior as proof that only someone insane could commit such terrible acts. That's not how insanity cases work in the court of law, you guys, just to let you know. The jury chose to believe the prosecution's assertion that Dahmer was fully aware that his acts were evil and chose to commit them anyway. On February 15th, 1992, they returned after approximately 10 hours of deliberation to find him guilty, but sane on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, with a 16th term tacked on in May. While in prison, it seemed that, Dahmer might have adjusted well to the life that he was living. He seemed like he was making a turnaround, except he couldn't control those fascinations that he had with human body parts. Often, he was found taunting individuals in the prison by making things that resembled arms and legs or skulls. Because of the charges that he had against him, he wanted to torment them with those things. On November 28th, 1994, during a work detail, Christopher Scarver was fed up with Dahmer, and after being taunted by him once again while in their work detail, Scarver confronted Dahmer about his crimes and proceeded to beat him to death with a metal bar he found. Scarver was put on trial and convicted for murdering Dahmer in their work detail in prison. And everybody, that is the end of the case known in the USA as the Milwaukee Cannibal. Thank you guys for joining me today. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications. I will see you next time for more Murder with Mo. I'm Mo, and I'm signing off the case today. Bye-bye.